In a previous video, I attached maple purfling strips to my ebony binding strips, and then I bent those strips in my side bending machine. And in this video now I'm going to be installing those bindings and most notably dealing with mitering those purfling strips around the sides, specifically at the end wedge, at the cutaway, and where the neck meets the body. So I begin with routing the binding channels, and initially this begins with setting the height and depth of cut based on how tall my binding pieces are now with the purfling attached to it, which the purfling strip adds about 1 millimeter of height. And I'm doing this, by the way, of course, with the router unplugged. And now I'm making the cuts in several passes, always minding the direction of the grain so as not to bite into the grain and get tear out. That's why you see me starting and stopping at the peaks of the lower and the upper bout and moving in one direction and then the other. Sometimes moving the workpiece into the direction of rotation of the bit, and at other times climb cutting carefully. Now with the main binding channels cleared, I begin scoring with a grommel in the Florentine cutaway area for the small section of binding that's going to connect the top and the bottom in that area. The scored line gives you a clean edge to work within when you're using your chisel to clear out the rest of the material. That way the material breaks off along the grain line out to that scored line and stops there, giving you a clean edge for your binding. And now the channels in the cutaway area are clear and ready for binding. At this point, I jump to the end wedge, which in a previous video I already installed. Now ordinarily, if I had properly planned out this guitar and knew everything that I was going to do from the outset, I would have cut out the end wedge channel and left it empty until I had my binding channels cut. However, the creative process sort of led me in the direction of installing that end wedge right away, which means I have to do something a little bit tricky here in order to accommodate the miters that connect the end wedge to the binding. It's not terribly tricky, but again, if I was doing this again from the get-go, I would have waited to install the end wedge. So you'll actually get to see two different ways of doing this. One, doing the miter with the pre-installed end wedge as I'm about to do here, and two, when I go back to the Florentine cutaway, I'll be doing the miters all together. So because I'm doing side purfling here, instead of just running the router directly over the existing end wedge, what I did was I stopped the router just before I reached the end wedge on all sides, leaving just a little curl of wood left over that ramps up right next to the end wedge. Now that it's exactly that wood that I have to carefully and surgically remove right now. I use a grommel and a chisel to very carefully score the excess wood that ramps up to the purfling strip, and then carefully remove that material right along that scored line with the chisel. And I do this in many small passes, scoring a little bit, then chiseling a little bit, then going back to scoring, then chiseling. Scoring, chiseling. And now I can set the grommel to score along the bottom edge as well to get a nice clean line there. And now, without further ado, the cutting of the miter itself. Okay, so that's how you can set up a side purfling miter in situ with the end wedge or whatever vertical portion of the binding scheme already pre-inlaid. So now what I'm going to do is show you how to do this a little bit of an easier way, in a more elegant way, by prepping your vertical portion of the side purfling and the horizontal binding portion before gluing them in. So first, I carefully mark out my angles. And then I cut. I'm cutting outside the lines here, by the way, leaving a little room so I can, as you'll see, chisel down to my final fit after it's glued in place. Now the long seam of the joint I put on the inside of the Florentine cutaway. So in order to do this, I have to thickness the inside second piece here so that it is reduced by the thickness of the first piece. Because both of those channels are the same width, and one of those pieces has to overlap the other one, thus taking up part of that channel by the thickness of that piece. And that's why I'm sanding here, so I can sneak up on a good fit between the two pieces. And now with these Florentine cutaway miters totally prepped, I can do the glue up. And see, wasn't that a lot easier, or at least simpler, than the end wedge or end seam miters that I executed earlier. Definitely a quicker and more preferable way of doing things. But sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. Now, working from one miter to another, there's always one miter that I can carefully prep. That's the one that I started on at the Florentine Cutaway. And then at the other side where the miter meets, I have to actually cut that miter on the fly with the glue, curing as I work. You have to work quickly, and so it makes for a pretty exciting task, actually, when you get to the other side. And when you do it a couple times, you can actually get quite good at doing things on the fly like this. Okay guys, and here it is all sanded down. I absolutely love what the Purfling strip really adds to this, that fine line of maple there. These miters came out really good actually, except this one right here is a little bad, but I'm actually going to show you later in another time in a later video how to fill something like that. It's actually not a big deal. I don't know if you can see that gap right there on the camera, so I'll fill that. But other than that, all these other connections came out really great, and I really love how in this cutaway, I actually didn't fully plan it out this way, it just kind of happened to be. It looks like a framed picture of a mountain here that just looks so crisp and really cool. And here I'll show you the back. Pretty simple on the back. But yeah, where it really shines, I'd say, is back here where it meets at the end wedge, and you can see the framing of that maple on both sides. Very cool. Goes well with the Rosette too. And I realize the lighting can get a little funky in there, so here we are taking a look at it outside so you can see it in the daylight. There's the tip binding. The miters look good there. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video every Friday. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.